What is a new unified Pareena without a new government? Hi, I'm your host Heatwave, and in today's episode we are exploring the government and parliament within the Empire of Pareena. I believe the speaker is wrong. There is no evidence of an impending war on the horizon. Their proposal of buffering the Mojave border is bold and a dumb move by the speaker. He couldn't barter down the price of arms from the major manufacturers, so he came here begging for a handout, like some hound dog. I object to the Department of Finance and Treasury's use of such a word. Order. Watch your words closely, Permafrost. Apologies, Empress. I retract my statement, but the Department of Finance will not support this motion. Noted. Now sit down. Welcome back to the Wings of Fire spin-off series, The Empire of Pareena. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the Empire's means of government, how it works, and its composition. The Empire's government is better known as a parliament, but there just isn't one parliament. The Empire is governed by the Imperial Parliamentary Council. This is the top government and the decision makers, the seats of most of the most politically powerful dragons across Pareena, and, of course, the throne to the Imperator. The Imperial Parliament, of course, has its chambers within the Imperial Palace. Each region in Pareena also holds its own parliament, called a segmentum parliament. They are responsible for leading and managing each respective region. Of course, some regions have larger parliaments representative of the population of that region. For example, the Claw Mountain and the Marshlands have very small parliaments compared to that of the Mojave. Finally, some larger settlements may have a local government. This isn't mandatory and is not expected, and is a little bit more common in the Mojave or the Tail Islands. Some settlements are too small to bother forming a structured government, but do follow some sense of leadership by following an elder or a public government. Most secluded living dragons have no care for government, as being so far away from the highly populated areas, a dragon typically focuses on surviving and thriving. But no matter the level of parliament, they all have the same setup. Each parliament is led by a moderator, a dragon responsible for keeping the parliament in line and in order. The front bench is then filled with representatives of each department. Their role is to argue on the floor in what direction and actions the Parliamentary Council should take to better each aspect of life within Pareena. For example, the Department of Military Affairs and Readiness will attempt to argue that to uphold the sword, the military needs to receive more funding and resources. The representative of this department will attempt to convince his peers that voting towards this plan is a good outcome, while his detractors will attempt to critique this idea, discrediting it. It's this back and forward discord within Parliament that leads to fair progress across the Empire. On the backbenches sit the scribes, the mathematics, the accountants, and other support staff that are constantly pushing papers, writing, and documenting everything their department does. Each parliament is formed the same, but I'll look closely at the Imperial Parliamentary Council because it's the biggest. The council conducts itself within the hallowed halls of the Imperial Palace. The center chamber is shaped like a seashell to pay respect to the origin of the first empress. Sitting at the head of the Imperial Parliamentary Council is the Imperator. Sitting on a very stylized throne, the Imperator will moderate the council and will end any tiebreaker votes with their decision. The Imperator holds an unbiased view on Parliament, Many look to them for guidance and inspiration. The Imperator is the embodiment of all that the empire stands for. They themselves represent the empire as a whole. Flanking each side of the throne is the 2 rows of benches. The back bench, as mentioned before, are for the department staffers. The front bench is seated for the departments themselves. Now, each department has its own office-like space within the palace, a place where they conduct their filing and heavy lifting. The centre of the floor is where all the propositions are made to the Parliamentary Council. Any dragon speaking on the floor is known as the Speaker. Standing on the floor is also the Lord Custodian. This individual is not only the leader of the palace guards and personal bodyguard to the Imperator, but helps manage the floor as an intimidating force. Now let's quickly list the many departments within the Empire and what they do. Now, a department doesn't just sit in Parliament. It is also responsible for implementing, organising, and providing aid to whoever corresponds to their department's identity. We'll start with the Department of Law and Internal Affairs. They are responsible for the law enforcement and any new sub-laws that are created. The Department of Agriculture and Farming. This department is responsible for establishing and maintaining the many farms across the empire, providing food to more of the urbanized areas. The Department of Military Affairs. As it implies, this department deals with the military, its funding, formation, and deployment. The Department of Mail and Distribution. This department is responsible for mail, communication, and the distribution of goods. They are heavily relied on by the other departments to deliver their goods. The Department of Finance and Treasury. Of course, this department is responsible for the currency and the handling the cost of goods. Now, just quickly, there is no real currency within the empire. Gold is typically traded among the wealthy or the major companies or investments to show that they actually have real value. But the average dragon very rarely has to pay gold for anything. They typically just trade an item or items for the same value of what they're purchasing. The Department of Civil Service. Civil service means fixing or maintaining public property and making sure dragons are connected equitably. The Department of Engineering. This department is responsible for building upon public property, but they seem only to work within the First City, the Mojave, and the Rainforest. The Department of Records. In conjunction with the Scroll, this department handles all record keeping and operates the biggest library on Pareena. The Department of Apothecaries. This department furthers medical science, trains local apothecaries, and does what it can to provide healing aid to the Empire. The Department of Foreign Affairs. As the name implies, this department is responsible for dealing with the foreign affairs, such as the SSG. The Department of Environment. Of course, this department is responsible for maintaining the environment and making sure that other departments follow the law. The Department of Science. They're here to uphold the cog and further the scientific goals of the Empire. The Department of Geography. This department handles mapping, making borders, and assessing the local geography. And finally, the Department of Fair Trade. This department is responsible for making sure all goods that are sold for a gold price meet a standard to sell. Each region also has its own parliamentary representative. This will leave the front bench at 20 representatives in total. Each department also runs its own sub-department, which is what takes seat in segmentum parliament. For example, the Department of Agriculture runs its sub-department of agriculture if it has a seat in any of the regional segmentum parliaments. So let's break down the Parliamentary Council. Now let's break down how the Parliamentary Council conducts itself within one rotation. Just after dawn, after the changing of the Palace Guard ceremony, all 20 of the department representatives will take their seat. The Imperator at the head and the Lord Custodian on the floor. The Imperator will read out the schedule for the speakers. In the previous rotation, the representatives put down their names in order they wish to speak on the floor. The Imperator will call each name to the floor one at a time. The speaker will make their argument. After, any dragon who opposes to the motion or the speaker's arguments may have the opportunity to speak from the bench. When all the talking is finished, the Imperator will call a vote. If the vote succeeds with a majority, then it will fall to the department to deliver the plans by sending off the subordinate staff behind the bench to make preparations. This process will continue until time reaches the sun's highest point. At this point, Parliamentary Council will take a short break, but return for the rest of the rotation. Continuing down the list, the Imperator will run through the rest of the speakers till dusk. At dusk, the Imperator will deliver a closing speech to mark the end of this rotation's Parliamentary Council. Each individual representative can only hold his seat as a head of a department or head of a sub-department for 4 cycles. Of course, there is no limit on how many cycles a dragon can hold his seat, but every 4 cycles, the wider population, or at least the wider population that cares, will vote for their regional representative of each department and then vote for the Imperial Parliamentary Council. It's up to each candidate to win the votes they need, showing skill, charisma, devotion, and initiative. Dragons learn quick who will lie and who will cheat just to get to the top. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, why don't you consider leaving a like and a comment and staying tuned for more, or checking out the channel for some of our other episodes. This is Heatwave, signing off.